So thank you, everyone, and for the opportunity to be here. My name's sorry, I'm not gonna sit. So my name's Teinie. I run CNN's audience and data team, which is really how do we put data at the heart of our business, from everything from our commercial strategy to digital measurement to how we understand audiences and so on. So I've actually worked in media for 15 years. We speak a lot about the right person, the right platform, the right messages. Nothing changes when you come to the news agency. And actually there's more so when you talk about news, about really understanding audiences, really telling those stories that matter and so on. So over the next sort of 15, 20 minutes, I'll leave some room for questions. I wanted to go through what the value of trust is in today. And actually we can stop there instead of going into the news environment. Trust is a really fundamental and strong word, especially in today's environment where it's not just accuracy of the news and the content that you have, but with data. With the regulations that we see in Europe around data protection, Silicon Valley is going through that, Asia is going through that as well. Trust is a really, really fundamental piece. And what does trust mean today? Not just as a news brand, but for the media industry, for marketing, and for brands today. It's a sort of a hot topic. This is one of my favorite quotes. And probably if you know me, this is the epitome of my career. It's not the strongest or the smartest that have survived, but actually those who are most adaptable to change. Change is a big word, and a lot that we hear today and today's environment and so on is change. The pace of change is increasing, change of the future. We're talking about the fourth revolution, and we talk about change like change is new. It's something that's just been born in the era of data and technology, but actually, if we take a step back, change or really adaptation is nothing new to our industry. So if we go back, as long as people have had something to sell, media and marketing has existed, right? Data and technology has not changed what we do fundamentally as an industry, but it's changed how we do it. So if we go back in a brief sort of history of things, in the early 20th century, marketing was born, right? So you had the era of mass production, mass media, and it was really about getting the products off the shelf as efficiently and as effectively as possible. Then you go into the 1920s, and it was the era of the salesman. So whether you wanted a product or not, you were going to be pitched that product, right? And so you start seeing media being used in a very different way. You see an increase of competition, and with that, the role of media has shifted to actually communicate those products to sell them in a more effective way. Then we go into the world post-World War II, and we hit the 1950s where market research is born. And for the first time, we start seeing a shift in that understanding of consumers. We see the marketplaces become saturated, and with that, there's an increased competition more so for each one of those consumers to get your product in front of them. So market research is born as a way to understand what those consumers wanted and actually making sure that brands then met that need in that unique way. Then we fast forward a little bit to the 1990s, where it was about relationship marketing. And with the birth of the web, we now have a way of interacting with our clients and our consumers in a very different way. And we get introduced to the world of spam. Email has now become a way of mass getting your message out there. It's no longer just about posters and magazines, but email has now become a way of targeting and really getting your message in front of those people. Let's fast forward to the 2000s. With the burst of the dot-com era, we then have inbound marketing. For the first time, we've shifted from outbound marketing to inbound marketing to really going through how can we put the consumer at the heart of everything that we do as a business, and more importantly, how do we create value for those consumers? So this is, we talk about, in conferences, I was at Adweek last week, and we were talking about this whole thing of the value exchange with consumers, like it's new today. And post-GDPR, it was the first time we're going to start creating value for consumers. That's existed since the 90s. We've had the consumer at the heart. It's just the ability to really understand them in this new data and technology era. How do we really precisely get to know audiences and target them in a new sort of way? So with the increase of pace of change and where we're going, we're seeing actually data and technology really fast forwarding and accelerating that change. So yes, change has happened through our eras, and it's happened in decades and in years. And now we're seeing an increase in terms of what happens this week is very different from last week and the weeks before, months and so on. So we're seeing actually over the last 5 years an increase in terms of media consumption, right? So people are spending over 10 hours a day consuming media in some shape or form. That's a bit ridiculous. Right? So 10 hours, whether it's in front of a TV or a phone or reading the newspaper or radio, radio's not dead, and in some shape or form, that's increasing and ever more. And you're seeing that actually, even though TV continues to dominate the time spent, we're seeing a shift in actually more online forms, especially in non-English speaking countries. We're seeing an increase of mobile usage. So 40% of people globally spend more than 3 hours on their phone. And when we looked at the stats for the UAE, that actually is more than 4.5 hours spent on phones. So being a very younger sort of area and country, mobile penetration and usage is even more so. So what does that actually mean? Why do I sort of say all of this? Well, I say that because it's changing the way in which people consume news and maybe the people consume media altogether, right? So whereas before, if there was a breaking news story, you'd go to the TV or you'd go to the newspaper, you turn on the radio, well, that's changed. Now people go to a dedicated news website or an app that they might have. You go to social media to see if the story is true. If your friends are talking about it, surely the event happens. And more so, you go and search for those news things. So as soon as things happen in the pace of where things go, is you're not running to a TV set anymore, you're turning to your mobile phone. So as things are moving in terms of evolving in terms of how people are consuming media, the frequency and how they're sourcing their news is actually increasing more and more. So before, I remember I was growing up, you watched the morning news, and then when you came back, there was the evening news at 6 o'clock, and then you had your dinner, and then there was the evening news, and if you watched the evening news, you were in trouble because you were past your bedtime. Now, the frequency in which news is consuming is even more so. So 83% are actually going on social media on a regular basis, not just daily, but actually more times and frequently in a day. They're going to websites 3/4 of the time, so whether it's a news website or an app on a daily basis or more frequently, and then they're going to news channels and 24-hour sort of news channels and so on. So there's a frequency and an appetite for what's going on in the world more and more. So whereas it used to be what the news topic was in the morning, didn't change too much in the evening, but this speaks to the pace of change and how much actually information is being disseminated, that the news cycle is changing on a day-to-day basis. What happened in the morning is old news by the time you hit the evenings. And more so, with that frequency change, with information really being out there and more prevalent, actually the type of news that people are consuming is also changing. So you might have gone, there's hard news and soft news, right? So hard news being what's the breaking news out there, political, the US coverage and politics and so on. And actually what we look at is international consumers will go to a TV set for those types of topics. So those big breaking news, whether it's the US coverage, politics, and so on, is the consumption that you go on TV. However, when you're looking at other things, news is not just what's going on, the big disasters or what's happening in, the lawsuits and so on, but actually what's happening in the world of style, what's happening in the world of travel, what's happening in the world of sports. So when those topics are going, actually consumers end up going to actually their mobiles or a news website or an app for those softer types of news. So I say that not just of understanding where people are, but actually as a news brand, how do you understand and underpick how those behaviors shift how you interact with those audiences and with what? So what does this mean? Not just as a news brand, but actually as media brands. How do you really understand and underpick what those consumers are looking at and what you need to do as a brand? So the first piece is having an enriched knowledge of your audiences. We've been saying that, I've said, since the 1950s with market research, we've been understanding our audiences. But really when I say understand your audiences, is understand that they're humans. There's people behind what you're understanding. They're not just demographics, they're not just their income, they're not just whether their education and so on, but what actually makes them different, what makes them unique, and how as a brand can you bring them and pull them closer to it? How do you define them using all the data and technology that's out there to define their audiences based on their interest, on their attitudes, based on their certain behaviors that make them unique and bring your brand to that? So the second piece is, how do you provide then your audiences with what they want, right? We're not in the 1920s. We're not in the era of whether you want it or not, I'm just going to sell it to you and I'm going to talk to you. But actually, how do you provide content that you know is going to be relevant and resonant to your audiences at that right time, so that you know that they're going to engage with that piece of content? I'm off my script, so we'll have fun now. And third is, in the world of trust, right? We started with the word trust and change, is actually how do you build credibility and favorability through being accurate and providing trust and reliability in today's world, right? Those are two fundamental things, and it's not just for news. Yes, it is important for news and the world of fake news. Yes, I said it. But as a brand, you have to still be accurate. You still have to build trust, because you still have a liability and a conversation to be had with your brands and your consumers. So in that, one of the things that we did as a brand and a CNN was to actually put boots on the ground in this region, right? So part of our story in building that credibility to tell the stories that matter, we opened up, CNN Arabic was launched in Dubai in 2002. We opened up a bureau in Abu Dhabi in 2009, so nearly 10 years this year. And then in 2014, we launched Connect the World. And the reason why we did this was to tell the stories that matter, to undercover really what matters and what those stories are that makes the human aspect, the emotional piece, was you had to live and breathe it. You can't tell those stories from the US. You can't tell those stories living in the UK. You have to be here to tell those stories. And what really makes this region unique and you know, just rich and powerful has to be here, right? It's why our anchors will fly to Tokyo months before the Olympic Games, is to really go, actually just having a nice backdrop is not what tells the games, but actually how do you go to the countries, how do you live in those cities to really uncover the athlete stories, what their journeys have been, is by being on the ground, by really understanding and getting to know the markets that you live in. And the reason why we did this was 40 years ago, we set out on this journey with Ted Turner.
To act upon one's convictions while others wait, to create a positive force in a world where cynics abound, to provide information to people when it wasn't available before, to offer those who want it a choice. For the people who thirst for understanding and a better life, I dedicate a cable news network.
So the reason why CNN was born is out of understanding that there was a need for news. There was a need for that appetite in there. And trust, as we sort of went, you know, trust and reliability in a world of fake news, to gain that global credibility and to be influential requires these two ingredients. So how do you become trusted? How do you become reliable? So we've just run a study, which we're premiering for you guys today, around actually what drives this. What does trust look like in a world of news, and why do people actually come to CNN, and what does that actually mean, or not come to CNN actually? So how you learn from both sides. So when we asked the question around trust and reliability, we actually are 4.6 times higher than the average out there. Right? And this is a powerful piece in there. So we could have just left it at that, but actually we want to go a little bit further to really understand what is it about our brand that people say they trust and they rely on. And the themes that sort of come out into this is our persistent to be able to report on the facts. Our international coverage, so we're not just a US-based company, we're not just the UK and Europe, but actually our ability to tell global stories and have that international coverage and so on, and actually the depth and passion of our anchors. And one of them is also the ability to go into places where other networks aren't willing to go. So actually having the ability to tell those stories, to push beyond the boundaries of where other networks will go. We will go there. And what that's translated into is actually us being influential in today's marketplace. So when 90% of our audiences come to CNN or to any other brand to really understand what's going on in the news network, we want to know, actually, we want to go beyond that. So as a team, as a data team, it's really understanding and unpicking what the relationship our viewers have with our brand, so we can continue to sort of respect that relationship and ensure that we're delivering content that's really going to resonate. So in that, we provide something that is unique. So 84% of the audiences, and this is not just CNN consumers, but all consumers, say they come to CNN because CNN provides something that is unique and the depth of analysis that they can't get anywhere else. 83% say it's relevant to them, and actually as a brand is actually personal as well, and in terms of what's something that they identify with. And in a world of aggregators and disinformation and so on, CNN is actually seen as an area to go to make up their mind. So where it's no longer just a one-stop shop in terms of a news article, people are going to multiple places for content. So it's either Facebook, I go to 4 news websites, I pick and choose, and you actually have 8 to 10 websites that you've gone to or news outlets. How do you make up your mind of what's true and what's not true? So having an anchor that you can come into and actually trust in that is an important part of that. And what that's translated into is actually us becoming a preferred news brand around the markets and the globe. And actually, I'm very proud to say that when it comes to the Middle East and in Africa, we are the preferred news brand, and that's something that we don't take lightly. And it is, again, it's understanding why and what really drives and underpicks that. And again, the themes that come to life in this is being international. We're not just a regional or national news brand. We are international, but our ability to have the boots on the ground allows us to tell those regional relevant stories. It's being a brand that has that wide breadth of information. So we are facts first. We don't go off of the world of fake news and everything, but actually everything is driven by data. It's driven by machines. It's driven by that intelligence that sits behind what is going to make that news story relevant. And actually, again, it's that depth and breadth and the passion that of our anchors, but also the staff that sits behind it. So from a commercial side, from an editorial side, the knowledge and the passion of what makes CNN is that sort of drive for what makes something tick, what's the heart of the business. That's translated in us in being number one, right? And so I don't say, that's where we've gotten to. And I didn't start on this slide because it is the journey that we've taken. So 40 years ago with Ted Turner, with us opening up the regions here, is actually translating us in being that number one news network out there. And that is as well regionally. So these numbers don't look like they would be, but actually number one in terms of each one of those countries, so multi-platform, so not just TV, not just digital, but really understanding consumers and that scale and being able to reach them, and not going off and treating consumers as channels, as many of us tend to and a lot of brands do, is this is my TV audience, this is my digital audience, but actually how do we look at our audiences and allow them to consume media how they want to? It means that we are number one across each one of those regions, from California to Tokyo and everything in the middle. And for the numbers people in the room, that means that actually 2 out of 5 people globally engage with CNN on a regular basis. Now, I haven't done that to do a sales pitch, but actually the pivot of what does that mean for us as a news brand and actually as marketers and brands in the room, which is when you have this amount of scale and 40% of the population is engaging with your brand, how do you understand them and what's going to be unique, and how do you provide them with an experience that's going to be really relevant and resonant? How do you create that brand intimacy on the behalf of your clients and your brands in itself? And how do you build trust? And so in that, it's how do we understand our audiences as individuals and as people? So it's really underpicking when they engage with audience, when our contents, what makes them different, what makes them passionate, what makes them really individuals and people. And in that, it's how do you then deliver back the right stuff? So in our ability to do that, we can drive more adults than our competitors have. We can drive the right ad awareness, brand recommendation, and purchase intent. And in that, it's understanding that we're not just breaking news. People come to CNN because we are the finance coverage that we have, our technology coverage, lifestyle, we're sports, we're travel. And I leave you with, if we have time.
We should be on the air.
We don't have time.
6 o'clock.
Okay, sorry. Well.
This destruction, absolutely breathtaking, that ISIS have left in their wake.
Sorry, I will. We don't have time for the video.